Okay? The smaller cow generates more profit per acre if you're selling calves at weaning time. Now, we don't all sell calves at weaning time. We realize all those calves go from our farms and go into a feedlot and have to be fed, and then they have to reach a carcass weight. And unfortunately, there's a genetic antagonism here. We want smaller cow size if this is right, but we want bigger carcass weight. Okay? So we got one of these antagonisms, a tough one to beat, but still one we have to be cognizant of. And so we come to the feedlot and we say, what are the profit drivers in the feedlot? We work with a feedlot in Kansas that has electronic IDs in all the calves. They track all the cattle through. They feed them to a constant fat endpoint. And we've got data on the last 185,000 calves they've fed from 2,300 different herds. When we analyze that data, it says there are several drivers of profit in the feedlot. Number one is feed conversion. Number two is the value of that carcass when they sell it on the grid. Number three is carcass weight. And then a distant fourth is animal health. Okay, so the big two drivers are carcass merit and feed conversion. Carcass weight is significant. I'm glad it's not the largest factor in there. It is significant. It's not the most significant as we analyze that data. And so you say, okay, those are the drivers. How much difference is there in a value of a given weight calf going into this feedlot? So we adjusted all that 185,000 head of data to a constant in weight. We said if they were all 650-pound steers when they went into the feedlot, and then we looked at what it took to feed them up to their slaughter weight, and we took the cost of the feed out of their value of their carcass sold on the grid, how much money was left to return back to that 650-pound steer. We did this analysis last spring, so here are the value differences. Each of these are numbers of groups, numbers of herds, not numbers of head. Okay, we're not looking at individual animals here. We're looking at the set of calves that came from a given farm. What were they worth on average? And the least valuable groups were worth as little as $550, and the most valuable groups were worth as much as $1,175. Okay, and the standard deviation on that, you know, one standard deviation from the mean is about $89 a head. To say it differently, if your calves are in the top 15% of value going into the feedlot, they're worth about 14 cents more per pound at the same weight as average calves. If you're in the bottom 15%, they're worth about 14 cents less. So there's this huge difference in the value of the animals. Again, driven by feed efficiency, driven by carcass weight, driven by grid value, okay? Those three factors drive all that difference. So what about feed efficiency? We heard a little bit from Steve Miller earlier about feed efficiency. This is a graph that's from USDA in our country where they fed a set of calves. Each of these dots is an individual animal. Here's how much dry matter intake they had on a daily basis. Here's how much weight they gained in pounds over 140 days. Here are two animals that ate the same. One of them gained about 440 pounds. The other gained about 600 pounds. And they ate exactly the same amount of dry matter per day. Now, if you've never looked at this data, it shocks you to think that there are two animals standing in the same pen, eating the same amount of the same feed, and gaining that much different. Even more shocking are the two animals in the horizontal bar. Here are two animals that both gained the same. One ate 18 pounds and one ate almost 26 pounds of dry matter. Okay? Every time we evaluate a set of yearling bulls, we get this kind of distribution. We find bulls that are eating 30-some pounds of dry matter, weighing 900 pounds. Some of them gaining 3 pounds a day, converting it 10 to 1. And at the other end of the spectrum, we find bulls eating 15 pounds of feed a day, gaining 4 pounds. Okay? This is a big driver. Now, what people all over are trying to figure out is that's in growing cattle. What happens when that cow comes to your place? We don't have the definitive on that yet, do we, Miller? But I'm going to tell you what my opinion is, okay? My opinion is that if an animal eats a lot when it's young, it eats a lot when it's old. Okay? Again, I resemble that remark. But it makes sense, right? Makes sense. That's not how we think of cattle, though, right? We go out and a cow, you know, I don't know if I get away from this. I'm far enough away from home, I'll say this, even though it's politically incorrect. But, you know, if we see a female walk by and that female is big and easy fleshing, we say, gosh, that's an easy keeper, right? We do with our cow herd. We do with our cow herd, but probably she eats a lot, okay? I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so we're not just talking about feed efficiency in the feedlot here. We're talking about how much dry matter it takes per day to maintain your cows every day of their life that they're on your operation. Okay? What if we can find animals that eat 50% less than those high consumers and produce the same? Now, is that an antagonism? Sure it is, right? Grows more, tends to eat more. We started with that premise. Can we find ones that eat less and grow more? The answer is yes. How do we find them? We measure the trait, we calculate EBVs, and we select for the genetic outliers. Okay, so just like we did 14 years ago, finding that Black Angus bull, now we're doing the same thing today, looking at feed efficiency. It's going to pay big, big dividends. So can we improve it? So let me back up. So we set up a system, and the system, same system that exists here at, I can't even say the name of the research center. It's Aurora. Okay. That evaluates how much each animal eats per day. And so we set up this system. We first actually, if I give you the full history, back in 2004, we had, where we feed our bulls, there are a number of small 10-head pens. So we sorted our bulls up by sire group, we fed them in the 10-head pens, and we looked at the feed conversion by groups. And we found big differences. And then we sent the data up here to Bio, who calculates our EBVs, and they calculated them for us, and they said those differences were heritable. Okay, so we said, okay, the trait's heritable, and there are big differences between sire group. We'd like to figure out which bulls we should use that are good on this trait. To do that, I really don't want to just pick one out of the 10 in the pen. Let's feed them individually. So we set up the feeders to do that, and we started collecting that data. That first data we collected, my memory lags, but I think was in the spring of 2007. I think that was either 2007 or 2008. And we collected bulls, we collected that data, we analyzed it into EBVs, and then based on those EBVs, we actually picked bulls that we were going to progeny test. We produced seed stock out of those bulls that came back into our system, and we evaluated them. But we realized that, you know, that there's a tendency in the cattle industry that we all tend to want to see things before we believe them. Okay, we got to be able to touch it. Okay. So I can sit here and say I found the bull that converted 4 to 1, and I used him, and his progeny converted 4 to 1, and you're like, yeah, maybe he didn't, right? Okay, especially if I'm from the States. I mean, you should have a fair bit of skepticism, right? But so we said, let's go out and take semen on these bulls. Let's find a big commercial herd. Let's AI the commercial herd to these sires. Let's send them to a third-party feedlot. Let's let them sort them up by sire groups and feed them in pens separately by sires, and they'll say what the data says. Okay? So we did it. Found a friend of mine in South Dakota. He runs 1,200 cows. He puts in 800 straws of semen. We sent him semen the first year on 10 different bulls. He had 3 groups of, we segregated his cleanup sires into 3 groups. Here are the AI sires. There's a total of about 500 steers in that deal. They were weaned over a 2-day period. They all went to the same feedlot. They were fed 80 to 90 days to get the pre-weaning effects out. Then we sorted them up by sires in a 3-hour period through their sorting system. We weighed them all in. We fed them for 70 days. We weighed them all out. A lot of data up there, okay? Basically what this says is here's what the pens weighed on average. Here's their average daily gain. Here's their dry matter feed intake. Here's feed to gain adjusted for their body weight, okay? What's that mean? I mean, if they weighed more, right, then to be the same efficiency, that you have to actually adjust that back. It's the same as Ian's data that he showed earlier. As the animals got heavier, of course, the feed to gain goes down. But this is actually ranked from the worst sire group to the best sire group on feed efficiency, okay? There are really 2 take-home points from this data I want to show you. The first take-home point is that here are the feed-to-gain EBVs that Bio calculated for us before we had this data. Okay, does it line up pretty close with what happened?